Welcome to Wealth Strategies Unleashed. I'm Robert Gilliland with Concenture Wealth Management.
And I'm Mike Alexander.
And thank you very much for joining us. We know you're going to find great information here because we are so lucky to have Michael Graci with Blackrock, who is really knows so much. He's forgotten more about Social Security than Mike and I combined know. And so we're very, very fortunate to have him on here because this is a topic that a tremendous number of people are talking about. I was going through as we were kind of preparing for this podcast, and I noticed, and going through doing some research, it's really interesting to me. 2/3 of people collect Social Security early. And it just kind of occurred to me what a mistake that potentially could be.
Yeah, and so Mike, one of the questions we typically get a lot is, hey, I've always heard that the break even between taking it at 62 versus waiting till full retirement age is somewhere around 78 to maybe 80 years old. How does that apply? What is that? I mean, I think people hear that they hear those figures and they're like, well, I don't know how long I'm going to live, so I might as well just take it early.
Yeah, Mike, we hear that question all the time, right? People say, I'm not going to make it until I'm 77 years old, right? I'm going to take Social Security early. And, in our last session, we talked about the fact that, people are living longer than ever before. And it's a factor that people need to kind of think about. And those break-even discussions that people have, around the water cooler or across their backyard fence, and that 77 number that you kind of see, really is an analysis around single individuals, right? And not taking into account that for couples, that scenario becomes a little different because married couples get two other benefits from Social Security single people don't get, right? And those benefits are spousal benefits and survivor benefits. So when you start thinking about how those two particular benefits are actually structured, then you add other components that come into play. Is there age differences between those spouses, right? That longevity question, differences in gender and life expectancy between males and females. We all recognize, right, that statistically women live longer than men, right? And oftentimes there are cases where couples have an age difference when they get married. All of these come into play and change that potential break even, right? And it's why you consult with your clients and say, hey, let's take a look at this. Let's get a little more granular. And when we start thinking about what might be the right collection point for our benefits and why everybody's different in a way.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me when we sit down with an engineer. We work with a lot of engineers being in the energy corridor here. And they're like, I'm taking Social Security at 62. And then we go and we run those numbers. And it's kind of like that light bulb turns off and they're like, we can evaluate this as I get closer to full retirement age. That's always interesting to see that light bulb turn off because it is different, especially when you run that break-even analysis for people. Mike, I want to talk a little bit about kind of some of the gotchas. And you mentioned this a second ago, is that when you have an age disparity, when one spouse is significantly older than the other, how should couples view that, and what sort of things they need to take into account when considering when and how to take Social Security?
Sure. Yeah. So let's kind of start with the concept around spousal benefits, right? Social Security was designed to protect historically the non-working spouse. And they did that by allowing for spousal benefits. Now, a spousal benefit allows the lower benefited spouse to collect a benefit based off of the work record of their married partner. Spousal benefits, the base calculation is 50% of the PIA, remember the primary insurance amount, of the higher wage earner. So let's say one spouse has a PIA of $2,000 and the other spouse has a PIA of $600 on the low side. Well, 50% of the higher wage earner is $1,000 a month, right? So what Social Security will do is they will determine a spousal benefit that in essence would bridge the gap between the lower wage earner, remember the one with a $600 PIA, and 50% of the higher wage earner. And if I do the math quick, and Mike, you can correct me or not if I'm there, but that would entitle the lower wage earner to an additional $400 spousal benefit a month, bridging the gap between the lower wage worker and the higher paid spouse. On the flip side, if a couple has one spouse that has never earned 40 quarters to be eligible for a Social Security benefit on their own work record, they're still entitled to that spousal benefit. Again, up to 50% of the PIA of the higher wage earner. Okay. That's spousal benefits. Now, the flip side, right, and where we're going to generationally as we move forward, is there's less of a disparity today and in future generations between the PIAs, the benefits of the spouses. In case my wife's PIA is lower than mine, but it's greater than 50%, right? So she's not going to be eligible for a spousal benefit. She's just going to be able to collect off of her own work record. So recognize the complexities that come into place when people start collecting those benefits. To add to your trap question, Robert, right? When you take Social Security benefits early, your benefits get reduced. And we talked about that formula that would reduce one's benefit. If I started at 62 with my full retirement age of 67, they would reduce my benefit by 30% if I started collecting at 62. Spousal benefits also have a reduction formula for the spouse that's collecting the spousal benefit. And heads up, it's a more drastic formula. The reduction at 62 is actually 35% reduction. So it's a greater penalty than the reduction off of one's own work record. I know that gets complex, but it reinforces why you really need to have an advocate helping you think about those things. So that's
just kind of go and think about that using your example of $2,000, they're going to have a 30% reduction, which is $600. Their benefit would be $1,400. Half of that is $700. So that spousal benefit, and that would be a
what
35%.
Social Security does do, Robert, is they calculate the spousal benefit based off of the PIA of the higher wage earner. So to your example, if I elected to take my benefit, if I'm the higher wage earner at 62, and that benefit gets reduced by the 30%, right? And my spouse is collecting a spousal benefit. The spousal benefit is based off of my PIA, the full 2,000, 50% of that, or $1,000. Not any reduced benefit I'm collecting because I started my Social Security early. But to your point, the reduction is based on the age of the recipient collecting that benefit. Different formula adds more complexity to the conversation, but that's ultimately how it works. And then if you take it the other way, Robert, there are no delayed retirement credits that elevate spousal benefits. They're capped at that 50% of the PIA number.
So Mike, leave it to the government to make things really easy to understand for the average individual out there. So you talked a lot about, obviously the age disparity. Tell us a little bit about like wage disparity. And, there's all these differences between one spouse delaying taking their benefit while the other one files for their spousal benefit. I mean, there's a lot of different nuances associated with this. So if the previous discussion wasn't complex enough, see if you can make it a little more complex for us.
Yeah. Obviously wage disparity creates a benefit disparity, right? And one way to make up, at least partially make up that benefit disparity is the inclusion of spousal benefits. The other flip side to that, Mike, is on the other end. It's on the survivor benefit end, right? So the surviving spouse in a couple scenario is eligible to collect the greater of the benefit based off of their work record or their higher benefited partner, right? So in that discussion, and what adds to the complexity around the planning is recognizing that the lower benefited spouse, if they are the ultimate survivor, would step up in survivor benefits. So that's where the complexity of the collection strategies that we talk about come into place, right? You know, from discussions with your clients over the years, and in our last podcast, Robert mentioned this. People think about those key age points. I'm going to take it at 62. I'm going to take it at full retirement. Maybe I take it at 70. And oftentimes when we run strategies, they say, hey, I want to take Social Security as early as possible. How much am I going to get? And you can tell them that, right? But what you also have the ability to tell them is based on your specific data, your ages, your benefits, your thoughts about life expectancy, we can actually determine an optimum age for collecting Social Security from Social Security's perspective only. And we oftentimes refer to that as a hybrid strategy or an optimized strategy. So let me give you an example of how that might work. My wife Jane's PIA is lower than mine. My benefit is higher. Look at this job that we get a chance to do. I can do this for years. There's no reason why I got to retire at 67, as long as guys like you are going to put me on your podcast, right? So I can do this for a long time. So let's say my thought around my Social Security is I might continue to work, allow my benefit to continue to grow, earn those delayed retirement credits, boom, 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 and maximize my Social Security. My wife, on the other hand, she might say, you know what? I might want to retire earlier. A hybrid scenario would look to say, at what age could the one spouse retire, maybe begin to start a benefit, right? While allowing the other spouse to do what they want to do. Recognizing my spouse starts Social Security early, her benefit might get reduced, but the cash flow is beginning for us as a couple earlier. Me, on the other hand, I'm delaying Social Security. I file later on, but more importantly, if my wife lives longer than I do, my greater benefit becomes her survivor benefit on the back end. Okay. You follow that approach. So it becomes a lifetime decision. And as Robert, as you pointed out in your introduction, I mean, looking at that versus both of us starting at 62, it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars of differences in benefits by going through a sense of optimization, so to speak.
I just want to make sure that I'm clear on that. I'm significant. I'm 4 years older than my wife. I'm 67. She's 60. What did I say? 4 years. She's 63. I decide that I'm going to continue to work to age 70. She decides to go ahead and collect. When I go to collect, is she going to get any more money or no?
Well, it depends. And what I mean it depends on is the difference between her PIA and yours. If her PIA is greater than 50% of yours, remember there are no spousal benefits, okay? She would just be collecting off of her own work record until she might potentially be collecting survivor benefits based off of your work record at some point down the road. If, however, her benefit is less, her PIA is less than 50% of yours, she could collect two different pieces to her benefit. A piece based off of her own work record when she files for her own Social Security, and any difference that might get her up to that 50% based off of your work record when you file for Social Security. That's the other requirement.
So your PIA is based on when you stop working and file, not when you hit full retirement age.
It is based on your full retirement, because you do have situations, Robert, right, where people work
Right.
well past 70, right? Their PIA can be adjusted based on those later year working wages, et cetera, just to add a little more complexity to the whole thing. But yeah, in essence, what you're talking about is true. Your benefit is going to be based off of your PIA, either reduced or enhanced, depending on when you start collecting those benefits.
Got it.
Now, Mike, do they still do the file and suspend where somebody says, "Hey, I want my spouse to get the spousal benefit, but I'm going to file and suspend so they can do it"? Or tell us a little bit about any changes that you saw there.
Mike, as planners, we used to love that, right?
Right.
To talk about file and suspend. An old rule that put into place that really allowed couples to put an extra charge into their Social Security. And file and suspend was a strategy that got eliminated back in 2015. There was a strategy similar, something called a restricted application, but anyone eligible for a restricted application is hitting 70 like right now. So if not last year. So that window is pretty much closed for most of our audience. So the key to the old file and suspend rule was I could file, suspend my own benefit, and allow a lower benefited spouse to begin to collect spousal benefits. What changed to that now is that I have to file and start collecting my own benefit in order to allow my spouse or partner to begin to collect off of my work record. That's the distinction, the difference with the elimination of file and suspend.
Yeah, that's what I thought I would ask for sure. Something that people, in the past always thought about, and maybe they have friends or they know people that did that, and then they realize when they get there that that option is not available anymore. So
yeah. And it's important because that's where clients might have talked to somebody several years ago about Social Security. They have one thought in their mind, right? That's why it's important to have ongoing, regular discussions with their financial planner because, sometimes these rules change and we need to adjust our plans accordingly.
Mike, one of the things is you're walking through that scenario, and we see this happen a lot. People they hit whatever retirement age that they planned for. Let's just assume that they click on Social Security at that age. Let's assume that they're 64 years old. They go and they actually, let's assume that they click it on and 12 months later, they are tired of every day being a Saturday and they want to, just for the human interaction and for the experience, and because they have knowledge, they go and get a job. And that job, it's a good paying job. Call it a consulting job. Doesn't matter. It's a good job. With regard to Social Security, and especially taking it early or even taking it at full retirement age, what do you need to be aware of when it comes to possibly working? Because you have to plan. We have a lot of people want to take a year off. They retire at 62, want to take a year off, and then they're going to start to consult. What sort of things you have to keep in mind around Social Security?
Yeah, there's two components to that, Robert. We talked a little bit about in our last session, but they're really worth repeating because it's a trap that people sometimes get themselves into, is recognizing that if I'm taking my Social Security early, prior to reaching my full retirement age, they have that earnings limit test, right? That impacts the level of my benefits, right? So what happens is, if I've started Social Security and I'm working and I have wages after I started collecting my benefits that are greater than, here in 2023, it's $18,960, right? They're going to begin to withhold my benefits. $1 of benefits withheld for every $2 of wages above that limit. Now, in the year, that calendar year, I reach my full retirement age, they give us a little over $50,000. They increase that income threshold before the wage test applies. Key thing about that, though, as soon as I get to my magical full retirement age, I can work all I want. My wages could be at any level. It's not going to impact negatively my Social Security.
So it goes to 50,000 in the year. Is that
calendar year
calendar
you
year?
reach your full retirement age? And the interesting thing about that is it's the calendar year. So let's say, for example, I hit my full retirement age in March, 3 months into the calendar year. I could use up that whole 50,000 plus in wages during those 3 months, right? It's an annualized little feature to how that particular component works. That is one of the traps that we want to encourage. That's why we tell people, hey, if you're going to continue to work, and because of those levels, probably even part-time, it makes sense to delay your Social Security, at least until you actually, decide to shut it down for good.
So, hey, Mike,
Yeah.
real quick, I know, because as we're talking about these, some of these kind of gotcha things that occur, obviously there's a taxable kind of discussion as well, in terms of the amount of your benefit that can be taxable. So for investors out there, and certainly, for our clients, it's a discussion that we typically have to have. And sometimes there's a few surprises along the way there. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. And these two things do go hand in hand, right? You think about the taxability of Social Security, and then you also think about the earnings limit test that we talked about. And many times clients kind of confuse the two. Social Security benefits are taxable. Right? We all recognize that. And they have a formula that determines how much of one's Social Security is taxable. And it's determining what an individual or couple's provisional income is each year. Now, provisional income is designed by looking at 1/2 of the Social Security benefit the individual or couple is collected. Add it to your modified adjusted gross income. Modified adjusted gross income is the same number that's used to determine Medicare premiums. So all the consulting you do around determining what Medicare premiums are going to be is the same type of conversation you would have with Social Security. The key thing about where Social Security becomes taxable is the thresholds for determining how much of my Social Security benefits are subject to taxation. Those threshold levels were set well over 20 years ago and never indexed for inflation. So if I'm single and I have provisional income that's above $34,000 a year, or $44,000 if I'm married and filing jointly, so you got one of those marriage penalties there, that means up to 85% of my Social Security benefits are subject to income taxes, federal income taxes, right? How much of my Social Security gets taxed away depends upon what my filing rates are. But for most of our clients, if we think about it, they're probably going to be at that maximum threshold because of how low those numbers are. Key thing to recognize, right, is sometimes people think 100% of their Social Security is not taxable. But again, most of our clients are probably at that key level. But it is important, again, to marry that discussion between investments, my comprehensive retirement and wealth planning, and my tax situations.
Yeah, in terms of just where do I want to take my income from, but more importantly, I think for certainly for a lot of our clients, you tend to think of you got tax to pay into the Social Security system, and now you're getting taxed when you take money out of the Social Security system. So, I know sometimes that can be a little bit alarming. So I really do appreciate you clarifying that for us as well.
And a handful of states actually tax Social Security benefits too. So that is another thing for those retirees when they want to think about, hey, where do I want to relocate? That might be something to do a little research on. Not a lot, but a handful.
One of the things that Robert and I really encourage our clients is to have pants without pockets, so that no one's ever trying to get in there.
Agreed. Absolutely. And not that we could do another 3 podcasts on Medicare decisions as well, but that's where even more decisions around what monies to use when really come into play, especially when client is looking at their Part B premiums and how that kind of comes into play. So back to the collection strategies and what we talked about. we don't want people to pigeonhole themselves into 62 or full retirement age or delaying everything until 70, but analyzing, hey, what might be the optimization factor that come into play? And what's that quality of life discussion, Robert, that you talked about? We like to think of retirement like the 3 trimesters of retirement, right? Early retirement, when our health is good and we want to travel and we want to do lots of things together. And then maybe that mid tier, the slower go, as we're beginning to slow down. And then maybe the no-go phase of retirement as we're not able to physically or capably do all the things that we wanted to do. That comes into play, right? When you want to think about, hey, what should we do from an income strategy? What are some of your thoughts when you try to bring all of these kind of pieces together for clients from a broader planning standpoint, and how you bring all the elements together?
Well, I mean, I think that's a great question, and that's where it all boils down to: going in and building that plan, taking into account all possible income sources, figuring out what the most tax efficient and what are the outcomes that you want to have happen from your assets and from your sources of income while in retirement, and making sure that you're taking all of that into account. I think that people have discounted how important this decision around Social Security really is. They think just going and throwing a spreadsheet in and saying, just doing a simple math and adding it up. But like what you talked about, there's survivor benefits, there's spousal benefits, there's all these other types of things and nuances around how you go to collect. And it all boils down to taking the time to start planning and plan early. We tell clients all the time, if they're retiring at 60, we're going to start having these conversations around 61. We're going to reevaluate it every single year until we're at the point where it is the right time for you to go through to collect, and making sure that we're maximizing what those possible benefits are to you, making sure we're taking everything into account so that you have the outcome and can live the retirement life that you want to live.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great advice for clients. When I have an opportunity to talk about Social Security, and obviously, I center my topic around these particular rules, I always want to make sure that the audience recognizes that I'm not trying to tell people when to take their Social Security. Quite honestly, it doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is they've sat down with the right advisor and the right advocate, and they've made the most informed decision they possibly can make. For some people, it might be taking Social Security at 62. And for others, it might be delaying it all the way into 70. And in your practice, I'm sure you've seen everywhere in between. Right? As long as they've gone through the process with someone like yourself, right, and come to the right decision based on their family's specific needs and wants, well, then they've done their due diligence. And that's what these conversations, I think, are all about.
100%. And I think with that, I think that's a good place for us to call this podcast. Again, this is part of a series. If there's anything that maybe you had questions, you can always go back and check out our first one on Social Security, where we were lucky to have Mr. Graci join us and walk us through kind of the basics of Social Security. Please make sure that you check out the rest of our podcast, and we will see you next week.
See you next time.